Multiple questions at the heart of this discussion. Obviously, first, what are intellectual standards? What role do intellectual standards play, or should they play, in human thinking? Why do we need to deliberately attempt to meet intellectual standards as we think through problems and issues? And where do these standards come from? Why are they important to teaching and learning? And how can we more effectively bring them into our work with students? These are underlying questions for this discussion. So we can begin with the question, so what are intellectual standards? And we can answer it in the following way. They are the standards or criteria necessary for making sound judgments or for reasoning well, for forming beliefs, for forming knowledge as against unsound beliefs, for intelligent understanding, for thinking rationally and logically. And the important thing here is to see that we're making judgments routinely as we go through human life. The question is, what criteria do we use to form those judgments? And this is the question at the heart of our work with students. Now, here are some primary or essential intellectual standards that, if you are not new to our work, you will recognize readily. If you are new, you will still recognize these, hopefully readily, because these are intellectual standards routinely used in thinking by humans to some degree. The problem is they're not used often enough to bring our thinking to the level it would need to be in order for us to solve the problems that face us. Here are just some of the intellectual standards to give us a starting place that we want our students to internalize. These standards come from a much larger set of standards, intellectual standards, that are extant in all natural languages, or the languages that we speak every day as humans. They come down to us through, if you will, linguistic history, and therefore we know these standards have been used for many years because they are now found in dictionaries. And our question is, how can we better bring these into our work with students, and which of these are the most essential for helping students make reasonable decisions in every part of their lives, and certainly as they reason through your content. The question of how many intellectual standards exist has never been answered. And in a way, it would be impossible to answer it because there are so many intellectual standards in natural languages. As we go through our day, we are continually assessing thinking without realizing we're even doing it. Somebody says something, I ask myself, do I agree with that? I'm assessing it. Does that sound right? I'm assessing it. Normally that means, for the typical human, does it fit with what I already believe? And therefore, the standard I'm using is not the standard of accuracy. In fact, it's the standard of whether and to what degree it agrees with what I already believe. So we routinely assess thinking, our own and other people's thinking, but not necessarily using reasonable standards. And we're not explicitly aware of these standards in any case, most likely. So to the degree that we are using intellectual standards, it's usually at the implicit level. And whenever people reason at a high level, in any field of study, they are using intellectual standards. They're meeting them, they're adhering to them, again, normally more implicitly, but the point is that they are reaching those intellectual standards. You see, if humans naturally adhered to intellectual standards, that is, without being taught, if we were naturally clear in everything that we thought, in everything that we said, and in everything that we heard, and everything that we read, then we wouldn't need critical thinking theory, because we'd automatically be doing this, and we wouldn't be automatically ignoring evidence that we don't want to see. We wouldn't automatically, in many cases, disregard relevant information that we don't want to see, that would make us change our point of view, or that would reveal that we're hiding something that we don't want others to see in order to better manipulate them. So what the human mind naturally does in many cases is it thinks without intellectual standards. It thinks my way is the best way. I am the determiner of intellectual standard. I'm the determiner of the standards that should be agreed upon, and we think this at the unconscious level. So we need explicit theory of intellectual standards because we don't naturally meet those standards or adhere to those standards. Now here are some of the essential intellectual standards that we have advanced at the Foundation for Critical Thinking and in the Pollyann approach for many years. And this is because if we can help our students internalize these, they will be advancing quite significantly in their thinking, and they'll see by implication other intellectual standards that they need to adhere to in certain cases and situations. There's another one that we've added to this essential list, and that's intellectual standard of sufficiency, because you can think accurately and you can think relevantly and broadly and deeply, but maybe you're not considering all of the relevant information, so you're not thinking sufficiently to answer the question reasonably and responsibly. And politicians will often do this. Some politicians, they will present facts that are accurate and show that they're relevant, and what they're really doing is cherry picking the information that they want the public to see, but they're not bringing in all of the relevant information, which should be adhering to the standard of sufficiency. So this is just an introduction to intellectual standards. Notice how simple this is. I often say critical thinking is so easy it's hard. What's harder than saying, well, of course your thinking needs to be clear. Naturally it needs to be clear. Well, naturally it needs to be clear, and naturally it makes sense that it needs to be clear. But how do we get our minds to go down the path of clarity when it is thinking? When sometimes the mind is just simply muddled. It doesn't know how to work its way out of a problem. It's trying, but it can't figure it out. So how do we correct for that? We need to do that through explicit teaching of these intellectual virtue standards to every student that comes through our classrooms.